OK, well, let's get an East Midlands perspective now on the Chancellor's spending review this week. We're expecting big announcements on councils, police funding and the impact, of course, of tax credit cuts on the East Midlands. Rumours will be circulating all weekend, of course, but our political editor Tony Rowe is here with a look at what to expect.
Well, George Osborne's announcements will be felt across the East Midlands, affecting everything from how many police are on our streets to how much our councils have to spend, and could even mean a cut in income for hundreds of thousands of people who rely on tax credits. When it comes to councils, government could devolve control of business rates to them by 2020 and end all government support, so they would have to be self-financing. Cuts to policing are controversial. As many as 400 police jobs could go in Nottinghamshire, and all our forces expect to lose officers as they face deep cuts. But could the terrorist attacks in Paris force a rethink? Finally, and possibly the biggest problem for George Osborne, are tax credits. Former Shadow Chancellor and Nottingham East MP Chris Leslie says the cuts as originally proposed are deeply unfair.
That's going to be taking away more than £1,000 in some cases of families who are actually at work. I mean, they're people who are trying their best to do the right thing. They might be, on low pay, but they're potentially going to be penalised even more. So we know that the Chancellor's going to do some sort of rowing back from that. But is he going to rob Peter to pay Paul?
The Chancellor has options. Hold back the cuts until the new living wage kicks in 2019. That'll cost. Or save elsewhere in the welfare budget like housing benefit. But the real rabbit out of the hat would be to reduce the planned £10 billion surplus in 2020 to a £6 billion one and scrap the tax credit cuts. That, Maury, would be a real gamble.
Thanks, Tony. And joining us to discuss this is Councillor Anne Weston, the Labour leader of Derbyshire County Council. Anne, what do you make of the suggestion there that councils might lose their funding from central government but be allowed to keep their business rates?
I think that needs very close looking at. On the face of it, it looks like an attractive proposition, but the country's economy isn't balanced, and it will favour, yet again, councils in the south and the southeast, and some of the central London areas at the expense of us. This is why we want devolution, to grow our own economy more strongly. But at the moment, there's greater reliance on government grants the further north you get. So for us, it's a significant part of our funding, and we would lose out if that was taken away without any rebalancing.
Wouldn't giving councils more control over their spending be a good idea, Andrew?
Well, it certainly would be. For Leicestershire County Council is the lowest funded county council or any council in the country. Retention of business rates locally, if we take away the block grant, which is about £136 million a year, our business rates in Leicestershire are £226 million a year, £90 million difference, and we're growing the economy very rapidly. So I can see great prospects for our area. Obviously, there would be some areas where aren't doing as well as that, and there'll need to be some interim measures to even that out.
What about the councils getting more control over their spending, Margot? What do you think about that?
I think it's a good thing to, by and large, bring control back to the people. I mean, at the end of the day, if you've got local issues, you want to see them resolved locally. So I think that's important. But
do you hear what Anne's saying
yes,
about the worries about that,
yes,
that we might
do.
lose out to the south, for example?
No. And I think that really should never be the case, because at the end of the day, you've got to have this fairly, and it's got to be equitable throughout the whole region.
It hasn't. It depends how you define equitable. I mean, the current formula, or certainly the previous formula, gave some element of the funding according to levels of need. Mm-hmm. So deprivation levels, unemployment levels, health inequalities and so on. Business rates won't factor that in, and that's the issue. So the danger is that the wealthy, affluent, good quality of life areas do better, and other places do even worse.
At the expense of the poorer ones.
But the point as well, he's made the point that what will happen is as the retention of business rates are phased in over the next 5 years, the Chancellor's promised that councils will keep all the new business rates. That gives a clear incentive for councils to be pro-business, get businesses to expand and locate in their areas, and that's got to be good news for the local areas, good news for jobs, good news for the national economy.
OK, well, you're heavily involved, Anne, in the moves to have a joint mayor across Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. We've been told to expect an announcement in the spending review about that. So what's happening? What's the latest?
Right, OK, well, since I last saw you, we've had intensive negotiations with government. made some very significant progress. We've got a really strong deal on the table. There will, as I understand it, there will be a mention in the spending review to flag up that we're at that stage, and then a formal announcement shortly after that. So we're really confident that we've got a strong deal that will benefit the area, and I think the issue is to focus on the deal and the benefits it brings along the lines that we've just said about growing our economy, becoming more self-reliant. We see the direction of travel with government funding. If we don't do something for ourselves, then we're going to be in a difficult position. So we really want to grab this opportunity and get in there and get moving.
It sounds like you're well placed, but I know, Andrew, you're concerned that Leicestershire isn't joining in with Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire in a joint authority.
No, we've got agreement for an L2 bid, Leicester and Leicestershire bid. I mean, one of the problems I see in the D2N2 bid is that most of the economic growth they're banking on is actually in my seat in North West Leicestershire around the airport. Well, I think we should be involved in this. And I think if you look at the three counties, you know, Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, the old Golden Triangle, my seat's right at the centre of that. We are delivering the economic growth. We need people to come and work from Derby, Nottingham and Leicester in North West Leicestershire.
But is that
it just
going to
makes
happen?
sense. I don't think there'll be any guidance from government coming out before the bill gets royal assent. But I think after that, I think there'll be a push, and I think it's a natural fit for Leicestershire, Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire to work together as a central East Midlands bid.
Andrew seems pro that. Well, would you be happy to include Leicestershire in your plans, or would that actually slow down? Because it's taken quite a while to get to the stage you're at, hasn't it?
And that's the issue. It's not about, you know, we're going to decide this today and tomorrow it will happen. We've spent 12 to 18 months getting to the place we are now. So, you know, I do wish Leicestershire and Leicester well with it, but, you know, they've got a lot of work to do to get to where we are, and we can't wait. The window of opportunity with the government is now, and rather than wish for a world we might want to see, we've got to work with where we are, and our deal is on the table and it's virtually signed off. Now, I would also take issue, there is a lot of economic activity around the South Derbyshire, South Notts, Leicestershire, but our deal is very well balanced across the whole of the county areas. So Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire aren't just at the southern end. The economy is along the M1 corridor, up into High Peak and so on, around the Newark area as well. So there's a lot more to it than just the airport and the Leicestershire border.
OK, well, Margot, what do you think the Chancellor's priorities should be in the spending review?
Well, I don't want to see him cutting our police force. I mean, I think the numbers are being cut, so I'd hate to see him...
We're expecting more cuts.
Yeah, but I think that would be completely wrong, and certainly with the issues that we've been talking about...
Could be as many as 400 posts in Nottinghamshire.
I think that's not acceptable. Under the present circumstances, that would be crazy.
What would the impact of that be in your view?
Well, I think it would be dangerous at the moment. We have a situation, you know, we're fighting terrorism. I mean, the last thing you need to do is to cut the people that you need absolutely to fight this. You can't do that.
In the light of what's happened, Andrew, do you think there's any chance that the Chancellor will pull back on that? I'm talking obviously about the events in Paris, having some impact on that.
The Prime Minister's already announced there's various extra spending for special forces, for intelligence gathering services, recruiting of extra operatives. I'm convinced that obviously that will be addressed in the Chancellor's statement on Wednesday. He'll take full account of that, because ultimately he will be held responsible for those decisions. But we've got to balance, we've got to get rid of the deficit. We've got to get rid of the deficit this Parliament. We can't wait much longer.
Anne, are you worried that the cuts in welfare spending will have a knock-on effect for councils like yourself?
Yes, they will. I mean, the tax credit cuts will impact on families who are already stressed. We've seen a major increase in demand for some of our children's services because of families under pressure. The national living wage will impact on social care costs. That's the Cinderella service. 40% of Derbyshire's budget goes on social care. If we cut that, as we will have to, then the pressure falls on the NHS. And, you know, the NHS is already under pressure. We haven't really had a respite since last winter with the winter pressures. The pressures have continued all through this summer and will increase again as we move on to winter. Social care is in danger of collapse, and that will impact on the NHS.
The problem with tax credits is they were used by Gordon Brown as election bribes. We got to the ridiculous situation where households with incomes of 58,000 were getting tax credits. 9 out of 10 families with children were on tax credits. Even if our proposals go through as is, still 50% of households with children will be on tax credits.
All eyes are going to be on that spending review announcement, aren't they? Thank you very much indeed, Anne. Well, we can expect to hear a lot of talk about the Northern powerhouse in the spending review, but the East Midlands has been helping to power the country for decades with Ratcliffe-on-Soar, Cottam and West Burton. We're home to some of the biggest coal-fired power stations in the country, but the government says they'll all have to close in the next 10 years. Is it a boost for the environment or a mistake that will increase our electricity bills? Jane Dodge has been looking at the arguments.
Their chimneys have dominated our skyline for nearly 50 years. Ratcliffe-on-Soar is one of 3 coal-fired power stations in the East Midlands. They employ hundreds of people, but now the government wants them closed by 2025.
I like the idea because it is an eyesore. You have so much countryside around here. It just spoils everything, you know, and some people, their only view, if they look out their window, is a massive power station.
This stuff used to affectionately be known as black gold. It still provides around 30% of our electricity, but as Britain's dirtiest fossil fuel, it's far from loved these days. E.ON, that runs Ratcliffe-on-Soar, says it should still remain part of Britain's energy mix, but the government has different plans.
You can live without coal and it can be replaced by gas, provided that you equip all the gas-fired power stations with carbon capture and storage. That is the only way you are going to have a decarbonised electricity supply.
In this new big push to clean up energy, the government is also backing nuclear and wind power. But what about solar panels? Solar farms are popping up all over the East Midlands. This one in Colston Bassett is Nottinghamshire's first community-owned energy project. Once finished, it'll provide energy for 1,100 homes. £400,000 has already been raised, but it's a race against time to find the rest before cuts to subsidies.
Why we're standing here today, why we're rushing the Nottinghamshire Community Energy Project through, is because it cannot happen with this tax relief ending on the 30th of November. We have to have everything in place. With the feed-in tariffs and the subsidies for solar, again, an 87% cut means that projects like this cannot happen.
But can environmentalists at least put their banners away when it comes to coal-fired power stations? Well, don't hold your breath. The government says plans to close them will only go ahead if the shift to gas-powered stations can be achieved by 2025.
Well, we're joined now by Richard Mallander, a councillor from the Green Party with Rushcliffe Borough Council. Richard, this might be good for cutting carbon emissions, but have we actually got the ability to replace the output of coal-fired power stations?
Well, yes, clearly we have. And from the Green Party point of view, we would like to see that done by introduction of much larger numbers of renewable energy sources across the whole of the UK. We'd be looking at extending the wind farms, the onshore and offshore, is where we think this should go. But also it's not just that. There is wave power, there is tidal power, there's, as Miranda was saying, there's PV as well, photovoltaic. There are a wide variety of sources. We can have a distributed energy system across the UK to help us replace the energy-intensive, carbon-intensive coal-fired power stations that must close.
OK, well, E.ON, who run Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station, have told us that they've invested heavily in the plant and done a lot to cut emissions there. They feel that coal does have a role to play in producing energy for the UK, Andrew.
Well, energy security is very important, and I think as Winston Churchill said, and it's still true now, that security in energy comes from diversity and diversity alone. I think we need a broad spread of energy supplies. But I mean, Ratcliffe will be probably nearly 60 years old by the time it's decommissioned.
It's 50 at the moment,
in 10 years' time, it's had a good run. It takes about 2 years to build a gas-powered power station. We have got time to do that, and I think we're going to see a second dash for gas. Renewables, according to government figures, are about 25% of energy production in UK this summer, so that is significant. And I think there are limits to how much burden we can put on the bills of people, ordinary citizens, to subsidise renewables, and 25% is a good target.
You're nodding your head in agreement there, Margot Parker.
Partially, but I think this is a bit of a knee-jerk, to say we're going to close these coal-fired power stations, because quite honestly, if we're being warned that the lights are going to go out out, and if we're warned that some businesses are going to have to stop manufacture and production during peak hours, you know, that will have a tremendous effect on the country, on our...
The government have made that on the proviso.
Yeah.
They'll only be decommissioned if we have
the replacements ready.
already
okay.
and up
but
and running.
UKIP's official line on this, Margot,
Yes.
is that we shouldn't be closing
Well,
coal-fired power
absolutely.
stations
No,
at all. In
no,
fact,
we
we should be
shouldn't.
making more, is what
We
Roger
should.
Helmer said.
We should, and we
like
have
Germany.
Yes, exactly. I mean, Germany has, I think it's 24 coal-fired power stations that they're presently working on. So it's cheap, it's efficient, and it does the job.
I think
But
Germany
a mix.
actually burning lignite, which is brown coal, which is very, very polluting.
Richard,
Yes,
what do you
that
think
is,
of
yes,
that?
yes.
Well, that's obviously not the way we need to go, not the way that the UK needs to go, and
Is it
not
a
the way that
backward
Germany.
step?
It certainly is, which I have to say is unusual because, you know, continental Europe has been and remains much farther ahead than we are in terms of renewable energy anyway. If you look at Denmark, if you look at Germany as well in terms of wind farms
Denmark
and PV
has the
powers
most
as well.
expensive electricity in
But they
Europe
have,
as well.
but it's not
It
just
does.
about that. You've got to go for the low carbon sources, and this is something that has been coming for a long time now. We've known about the issues to do with climate change for a long time now, well over 2, going on 3 decades. We are not coming to this too quickly. This is way past the time that we should be addressing this.
How are we
We
ever going
must
to
get this
cut?
down.
How are we ever going to cut our carbon emissions if we have more coal-fired
Well,
power
it's a mix.
stations?
I mean, we're talking about a mix. Clearly, you've got to have some sustainable energy, clearly. I mean, that's a given, it's obvious. But not to do this, as you quite rightly say, it's got to be that we're not going to be under any risk. People are not going to have to switch the lights off. You've got to be practical. You've got to have businesses able to operate and not driven to other high-carbon areas where they go.
The mix is wrong. We are at the moment far too reliant still on carbon-intensive sources like coal. Now they've got to go. Nobody's disputing that. I don't think anybody's disputing that. But what
I think Andrew Bridgen might be.
But what the real issue?
Well, you have to have.
We have to have
conventional power stations on standby,
Yes.
chucking out all the emissions on standby in case the wind drops.
Absolutely.
Because you cannot rely on wind power alone.
You
Because
can't.
when the wind drops,
You can't.
Nobody has ever
So you have to have conventional power
nobody
stations.
has ever said that it would be reliant entirely on wind power. As I said at the start, you're looking at wind, you're looking at wave, you're looking at solar. You look at
What you're saying is it has to be a combined mix of all those different things.
of renewable energy
Well, that's
generation.
true, but remember, the EU have really asked for some unsustainable figures. I mean, it's very unrealistic. They really have got to smell the
It's
coffee.
not the figures that are unstable, it's the carbon emissions.
But
That's what we must cut.
We heard Colin Snape, didn't we, in our film talking from Nottingham University, saying that unless you install carbon capture systems in the new gas-fired power
And that
stations.
technology is not really ready yet.
It's not been developed yet. You
yes.
still won't be able to meet the targets of cutting emissions, Andrew.
But burning gas is less polluting than burning coal, and we're hopeful that we're going to have shale gas available nationally. That's going to give us a lot more security going forward.
We hadn't heard very much about the Energy Secretary's plans about that, Andrew.
No, well, currently the Americans are now exporting shale gas around the world.
I know they are, yes.
You know, it's nice.
Still very controversial in this country.
Well, energy prices
It
have
is.
dropped. Energy prices have dropped all around the world. If we can hold our shale gas reserves and never have to use them, but by them being there, we can keep those prices low. Because if prices do rise, then we can exploit them.
So more shale gas is the answer?
No, not at all.
More coal?
It's another sort of dead end. The red herring is the shale gas and the fracking idea. We had this thing back in the 70s, people saying, oh, we can go to a sustainable future with renewable energy. We'll just use the North Sea gas to get us there. And then we get to the end of having North Sea gas and we're having to import gas from Russia, which doesn't sound like a stunningly good idea to me, to be honest.
Very bad idea.
And what's the issue? What's the issue now? Oh, we'll just use fracking to get us to a renewable
Richard,
future.
we'll have to leave it there. Richard
Richard
Mallender,
Mallender,
thank you very much for coming into the
Yeah, thank
studio